Dear student, welcome back again in our today's session. And in this lecture, I'm going to discuss about the difference between primary and secondary data. And as you all know that in previous lecture, I have already spoke about on the concept of primary and secondary data. So without further ado, let's start our today's topic. So first, we will understand about primary and secondary sources. So basically, we talk about the primary and secondary sources. So as you all know that, we have already discussed about the primary data. Primary sources are the raw material of a history, original documents, or a physical objects that were created or experienced contemporary with the event or period being studied. So these sources are direct evidence and offer an understanding about the particular phenomena. And primary sources are invaluable for researchers conducting original research as they allow the researchers to interpret the data directly without relying on someone else's analysis. For example, historians might use primary sources to construct an accurate narrative of past events, while scientists may rely on a raw experimental data to draw the new findings, results, and conclusions. And if we talk about the secondary sources, so basically, secondary sources are interpretations, analysis, or summarizes of primary sources of other secondary sources. They are created after the fact, often by scholars or experts who did not directly experience the event or time period in a question. These sources help to context in the explain or critique the primary sources. So basically, secondary sources are useful for gaining a deeper understanding of a topic as they provide the context, analysis, and interpretation. Researchers often use the secondary sources to get an overview of a subject, understand the scholarly conversation around a topic, or to identify the key primary sources for further study. For instance, a study writing a paper on the French Revolution might start with the secondary sources like a textbooks to understand the key events before divining and into the primary sources like the letters from the key periods. So overall, we can say that about the primary sources are original first-hand documents or evidence created at the time of an event or by someone directly involved. And they offer a direct, unfiltered access to the subject matter. Examples includes like a diaries, letters, official reports, photographs, interviews, and artifacts. And if we talk about the secondary sources, so secondary sources are interpretation or analysis based on primary sources or other secondary sources. They generally provide a second-hand amount and often offering a context, commentary, or a critique. Examples like it can be articles, biographies, and documentations. Now, next we are going to discuss about the key differences between the primary and secondary sources. So if we talk about the key differences, so basically in the realm of research, whether in the humanities, social sciences, natural sciences, or any other field of study, the types of sources used are fundamental to the integrity and outcome of the work. Researchers rely on the various types of sources to gather the data, evidence, and insight, which can be broadly categorized into the primary and secondary sources. These sources differ significantly in their origin, perspectives, and use, each contributing uniquely to the research process. Understanding these differences is very essential for any researcher to as it allows them to choose the appropriate sources and to create a understanding about the particular phenomena for their study and ensuring the credibility and depth of their work. So, as you can see that the first one is origin of source. Basically, we talk about the origin of source. So, the origin of source refers to the point in time and context in which it was created. This is one of the most fundamental difference between the primary and secondary sources. Basically, if we talk about the primary sources, so primary sources are original documents, artifacts, recordings, or data that are created with the event or subject being studied. These sources serve as a raw material of research, offering a first-hand evidence that has not been filtered through the interpretation or analysis. Because primary sources are created at the time the event occurred or were produced by someone who directly witnessed or was involved in the event. They carry a level of authenticity that is very essential for original research. And if we talk about the examples, so examples of primary sources can be letters, diaries, photographs, legal documents, work of art, artifacts, speeches, and scientific data. In the context of historical research, a letter written by a soldier during a war, a treaty between a nations, or an ancient artifacts and from the site would also be considered as a primary source. In scientific research, data collected from the experiments such as observations, measurements, or survey responses also qualify as a primary sources. So the creation of primary sources is often driven by the need to document, record, or express something at a specific moment in time without the influence of hindsight or external and interpretation. So this immediacy gives the primary sources their unique value in research. If we talk about the secondary sources, so in contrast, secondary sources are created after the event has occurred or the data has been collected. They are typically produced by the individuals who were not directly involved in the event or the original or data collection, but who analyze and interpret, critique, and synthesize the primary sources. The creation of secondary sources often involves a level of reflection where the author has the benefits of insight, allowing them the place of primary sources within a broader context. So, if we talk about the examples of secondary sources, it can be includes the textbook, review, articles, biographies, documentation, and academic papers that discuss or analyze primary sources. A historian's analysis of a soldier's letters, a critique of a work of art, or a review article summarizing the findings of a multiple scientific studies would all be also be considered as a secondary sources. So in this way, we can say that the secondary sources are invaluable for researcher because they provide a in-depth understanding about a particular phenomena and overview of the existing knowledge on a topic, summarizing the key findings and offering an interpretation that can guide your further research. They often serve as a starting point for understanding a subject that are used to develop a hypothesis or the research questions that can be tested within the primary sources. So now next one is perspective. If we talk about the perspective, so basically the perspective offer a sources another key distinction between the primary and secondary sources. This perspective influences how the information within the source is presented and understood. So first we will understand about the primary sources. Basically, primary sources provide a direct, unfiltered insight into an event, topic, or period. Because they are created comprehensively with the event, they capture the immediate experiences, thoughts, and emotions of those involved. This rawness allows primary sources to convey the real realities of the past or the original data in a way that secondary sources cannot. Let's take examples. If we talk about the examples, so a diary entry from a historical figures offers a window into their personal thoughts and experiences. At a specific moment in a time, a photograph taken during a significant event captures the scene exactly as it was. And without any kind of interpretative lens, scientific data collected from an experiment presents the results as they were observed without any post op interpretation or analysis. And the unfiltered nature of primary sources means they often require a careful interpretation by the researcher since they are not mediated by analysis or critique. They can sometimes be difficult to understand or contextualize without additional knowledge. However, the directness is also what makes the primary sources so valuable and so reliable and valid. So as they allow the researchers to engage directly with the subject matter and in its most authentic form. And if we talk about the secondary sources, so basically secondary sources on the other hand offer an interpretative or analytical perspective on the primary sources or other secondary sources. The author of secondary sources often use primary sources as the foundation for their analysis but go beyond to simplify the presenting the facts or data. They interpret the significance of the primary sources, critique their reliability or biasness. It can be basically place them within a broader historical culture or theoretical context. Let's take an example. A historian might analyze a set of letters from the soldiers to explore the psychological impact of war. In doing so, the historian would not present the content of the letters, but also interpret what the letters reveal about the broader experience of soldiers during the conflicts. Similarly, a literary critic might analyze a novel to explore its themes, narrative techniques, or culture significance, providing an interpretation that goes beyond the text itself. So we can say that the interpretative nature of secondary sources means they are inherently shaped by the perspectives, expertise, and biases of their authors. This is both a strength and a limitations. On the other hand, secondary sources can provide a valuable insight and contextualizations that primary sources alone cannot offer. On the other hand, they can introduce bias or subjective interpretation, which must be carefully considered by the researcher. Now, The next and the last one is use of sources. So basically the use of primary and secondary sources varies depending on the research objectives and the stages of the research process. Each type of sources serves a different purpose and it's often used in a complementary ways. So first we will discuss about the primary source. So basically primary source are used to primarily for the original research because they provide a first-hand evidence of data. They are essential for the researcher who aim to gather the original insight, test hypotheses, or explore the new areas of inquiry. In historical research, for example, primary sources are used to reconstruct events, understand the perspectives of people from the past, and develop a new interpretation of historical phenomena. And in science, primary sources in the form of experimental data, observation, or a survey. Results are used to test hypotheses, draw conclusions, and contribute a new knowledge to the field. For example, a scientist conducting a study on a climate would collect the primary data from the weather stations, ice cores, or satellite images to analyze the trends and make predictions. And the use of primary sources, it highly require a high level of critical thinking and analytical thinking, problem solving skills. Researcher must carefully assess the reliability, authenticity, and relevance of the sources, considering factors such as the creator's perspectives and the context in which the sources was created and potential biases. So this critical engagement with the primary sources is what allow the researchers to produce original work that adds to the body of the knowledge in their field. Now, on the other hand, if we talk about the secondary sources, so basically secondary sources are used to understand, explain, or contextualize primary sources. They provide an overview of existing knowledge on a topic, summarize the key findings, and offer an interpretation that can guide a further research. Researchers often begin their work by consulting secondary sources to gain a broad understanding of the subject, identifying the gap in our existing literature, and develop a research questions or a hypothesis. For example, a researcher studying the impact of industrialization or urbanization might start by reading a secondary sources such as books, journals, articles, and reviews that summarize the previous research on the topic. So these secondary sources would provide the researchers with a comprehensive overview of the current state of knowledge, highlight the key debates or controversies, and suggest areas where the further research is needed. And secondary data are also valuable for the researcher who seek to place their findings within a broader context after conducting a original research and analyzing the primary sources. Researchers often turn to a secondary source to help and interpret their results, compare them with their previous studies, and discuss their implications. While secondary sources are very important for providing the context and interpretation, they are not without limitations. So, because they are one step removed from the original data or events, they can sometimes oversimplify or mispresent the primary sources. Researchers must therefore use the secondary sources critically, assessing the credibility of the authors and the quality of the analysis and the relevance of the interpretation to their own work. So overall, we can say that the both primary and secondary sources are very important components of the research process, each serving a distinct but a complementary roles. Primary sources offer a direct window into the past or the original data, providing the raw materials needed for the original research. They generally allow the researchers to engage directly with the subject matter, offering the unfiltered insight that are very crucial for the developing a new knowledge. Secondary sources, on the other hand, provide the necessary context, interpretation, and analysis that help the researchers to understand the significance of primary sources. They offer a broader perspective, summarize the existing knowledge, and guide the researcher in formulating their research questions, hypotheses, and interpretation. And together, primary and secondary sources enable the researchers to construct a more complete and nuanced understanding of the topic. By critically engaging with both types of researchers and sources can produce a work that is not only original and insightful, but also grounded in a thorough understanding of the existing literature and the broader context of their research. So, in research phenomena, in research field, the careful selection of the research and use of primary and secondary sources are key to producing a high quality work. Researcher must be diligent in assessing the reliability, relevance, and bias of their sources, using them in a way that maximizes their strength and mitigates their limitations. And ultimately, the most important, the primary and about the primary and secondary sources, the interplay between the primary and secondary sources is what allow the researchers to contribute meaningfully to their field and advance our collective understanding of the world. So, this is all about the difference between the primary and secondary data. Thank you.